everyone for joining us for this episode of Punching Through, sponsored by Caf and Fingercheck. And today I'm super excited to introduce you to and get to know a little bit better Angie Dobbs from Wave and Heather Lamont, also with Caf. Ladies, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to be here.
We want this to be really just feeling like a chat and a conversation. So first thing I want to say is, what's better than having two Canadians on a global podcast featuring female executives, but three Canadians. Wow. I mean, that for me feels new and exciting. So I'm really glad that Vanita actually was good enough to even point it out that there's three of us Canadians on here. So that's kind of fun. But as we kind of get into more serious business, one of the areas I want us to explore together is, we've all likely have pivotal moments where we had that either aha moment or that realizing that, oh my goodness, we're in this leadership role. And Angie, I'd like to start with you. Can you maybe just talk us through a little bit about when you had that aha moment, or what was that pivotal moment where you kind of found yourself in that leadership place?
So how I ended up as a leader was through complete grit and stubbornness, I think. My first job out of university was at TD Bank, and I was a fraud analyst. And I knew I was getting sort of bored and wanted to take on something new. And I knew a leader on another team was soon to be leaving, and I expressed my interest in the role. But I was actually discouraged from applying because, I hadn't been here long enough. So I took it upon myself to figure out how to do her job, and sat next to her, got shadowed on what she needed to do. And I basically made it such that they had no choice but to hire me into this role. And so it was a very good opportunity and experience to kind of step up and prove what I'm capable of. And it was it was an independent manager role that very quickly became quite big. And I needed to start building my team to support it because the mandate got so broad. So that was a really exciting step into leadership.
That's great. And I love how you depicted it from the start. There is this element of grit and stubbornness. And I sort of underpin that with real confidence, right? And there's a level of just being brave and just putting yourself out there, which I think is incredibly important. Good for you. I love that. That's a great story.
Thank you.
Heather, how about you? I know that you've got something to share in this area.
Yeah, and it's probably, Angie's last words and your kind of summary there, Simonne, were a great segue, because for me, and I'll share an experience also about my first leadership position, also at a financial institution, MBNA Canada Bank, which no longer exists through a byproduct of multiple acquisitions. But I was in my early 20s at the time. And I think, the scenario, I was leading a payment and credit insurance operations team. It was my first leadership opportunity. And you speak about kind of bravery and courage. And I was, I think, a byproduct of a decision that was made by my leadership, where they instilled in me discretionary authority over an obscene amount of decision making for what was a very contained period of time. So a 24-hour period of time where my leader and my leader's leader were both out of the office. And they said, what could possibly go wrong by giving it to this, very new junior leader in terms of signing authority, discretionary authority over this team? Well, the way Murphy's Law goes is obviously the worst case scenario kind of happens. It was quarter end. We were accountable again for a huge portion of the P&L in terms of the processing of the payment files. This was a long time ago, so a lot of it was done very manually. And we ran into trouble where we didn't get the confirmation of, what was almost a $27 million payment file. And I can remember sitting with my senior vice president at the time saying, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to push the file again and risk double processing, or not send it and we're going to miss the quarter? And you're going to have to deal with the chief financial officer and the chief risk officer around why we missed processing $27 million in payments. And given it's banking, we were up on a deadline, and she's sitting there staring at me, looking at her watch, saying, Heather, you've got 5 minutes, make the call. And I was going through the verbal diarrhea of what I'm going to do in all the different scenarios. And then she'd say, you have 3 minutes. What are you going to do? make the call. And it was such an important lesson because she didn't even direct me in terms of my own internal analysis of the risk. She trusted me and followed through with her decision in the moment to give me the discretionary authority to make the decision. And I did. I made the call, which was to reprocess the file. It ended up being the wrong decision. We double ran everything, and it resulted in myself and my team working through a weekend to manually reverse all of these payments and NSF fees and that type of thing. But at the end of the day, she allowed me to make the decision.
Yeah.
And it built a very important lesson in me in trusting your people and trusting your decisions, right? And that was really, really empowering. And it's something that, again, more than 20 years later, I still think about that day and how she was like, this person's going to totally mess this up. Right. But we're going to follow through. And she did.
Follow through. Yep. Wow. That's a great talk about brave. Wow. And brave on her part too, right?
Super
really sitting back and allowing for that to happen. And it sounds as though you didn't lose your role as a result, which is the important follow through and the important message, I think, that goes with that. So that's, touching on a little bit within your story and scenario, Heather, around sort of mentorship, et cetera. Can one of you just sort of share with you either what you see as important as being a mentor, or those defining moments that you continue to lean into as a leader of somebody who showed you how to be a great mentor?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. I wouldn't be where I am if not for mentorship, and it's really important for me to be able to give that back. When I was early in my career, I was part of the Toronto Women in Leadership Mentorship Program, and I had this amazing mentor, Wendy Williams, who she guided me about what was possible. I worked at the bank. I'm from a small town. I didn't know what tech was. I was like, I'm in the bank. I'm going to work here forever. No shade at the bank. It was an awesome opportunity. I'm so grateful that I started my career there. But she pushed me to think about, taking risks to try something new. And that's when I joined Wave, which was a small startup company at the time. And it was crazy scary. And I learned so much. And moving from the corporate environment to the fast-paced tech environment, where very different risk appetite. I remember my new boss at Wave. Oh, I've got fireworks. Okay. He grabbed me by the shoulders and jokingly kind of shook me one day and said, stop asking for permission. We hired you because we trust you. Right. And that was it was so empowering and freeing and scary, similar to what story Heather just shared. Like, what do you mean I have to make these decisions on my own without the safety blanket of all of the approval and red tape that exists at a more corporate company? But it's the greatest thing that ever happened, greatest risk I've ever taken. And so now I actively am mentoring, 1 to 2 people external to my organization at any given time. I proactively seek out young women within my company and within my team, and just take a little extra effort to make sure they know I'm there to support them if there's anything that they need. And it's great when they take me up on that. So it gives me energy to have these conversations, and I feel like it's my duty to give back and help others benefit from the opportunities I've been given through mentorship.
No, I think that's great. Thanks for sharing that, Heather. I've seen your mentorship in action, and you really are very gracious with your time and how you support your team. But is there anything in particular that you want to share around like why you believe so deeply? Because I see that in the output and how you spend time with people.
Well, thank you. First off, thank you for that and saying that. It is something that's really important to me personally as both a mentee and a mentor. And I think, my comments on this, why it's so important to me is because I benefited so greatly from it myself. Mm-hmm. And the advice that I like to try to give people and also try to role model is there's value and time and place for both the formality of traditional and formal mentorship programs that are often, through either larger companies or different associations, professional associations or whatnot. And I've benefited really greatly from the exposure, the expanded networking experience, and the ability to be a thought partner with somebody and to grow from them professionally when somebody is X degrees removed from your day-to-day, but it doesn't replace the informal mentorship that comes. And I think a lot of what Angie spoke about as well, like I specifically seek out high potential people that are, a couple of steps below me in my career, but within my own organization, because mentorship and influence and sponsorship to me go real hand in hand. So I want to be close to the emerging talent within my broader team, within my organization, because I think as a leader, there is responsibility on my part to also, clear those barriers and paths and to be a sponsor for emerging talent. And I can only do that when I consciously choose to invest my time into their growth and development and helping them as well.
No, I think that's great. And I think that, organizations also, in my opinion, have a really significant role to play. I mean, us as individuals are the ones who are, quite frankly, have to have that personal motivation and drive to want to help. But, something you said, Angie, and, spending majority of my career within the HR profession, those barriers, right? Not guidelines, but those barriers that you can't make a move because you haven't been with the company long enough. Gosh, I remember just having to live through some of those and having to message that back as a real constraint for people. So I really challenge organizations out there, regardless how big you are. And I get you need to have some level of consistency the larger that you get. But my goodness, when you have an opportunity to really allow for someone to flourish, just think about what the spirit and the intent of those are, and then knock those barriers down every day to make sure that we're supporting people, regardless of, male, female. We should just be supporting people in general. So I always put challenges out there to organizations to make sure they're doing everything to really support and foster that kind of thinking. Before we close out, is there any final words or statements that you would just be like soul crushing to you if you didn't get a chance to share it? Any last final comments that you guys want to leave for people out there?
I think the one key message that really resonated with me in the past that was shared around just women in leadership and some of the misconceptions we're told along the way of how you need to act or behave to be successful. And I wish that we could continue to accept and appreciate the differences between the genders. Yes. And know that, women leaning into your natural characteristics and being your authentic self is the most important thing, and not this misconception of acting like a man to be successful, right? Like, I think we're starting to realize that a lot more in our industry, but it's not highlighted or celebrated enough. So for anyone who's doubting themselves, we all have imposter syndrome. Most successful people have a lot of imposter syndrome. That's an insight tip. Just, make sure you're being your authentic self and not trying to fit into something that we're often told is necessary for success, because it's just untrue.
No, I love that. Thank you. That's always a really helpful reminder for any and all of us on a daily basis. Heather, I'd be remiss in not giving you a final opportunity to share some thoughts.
I think for me, and it's probably a bit of an unconventional kind of school of thought on this, and I think it applies regardless of gender, but I think it's really important if young women can do this, is, people will often ask me, well, you've had an interesting career. How did you get to where you are? And I think, like, if I break that down and would diagnose it, I've always been willing to do the jobs that no one else has wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And to take that risk, right? So especially in areas that are historically male dominated, if you take a job that even they don't want to do, then that gets you in. And you start to prove yourself as somebody that has the courage, that has the grit, that can succeed. and kind of push through. That's allowed me in some cases to really leapfrog. And I think when I've encouraged and have seen other people do that as well, it's amazing, again, how fast you can chart your own path and course. Again, when you're willing to do the stuff that not everyone wants to do. They tend to be the riskier roles.
Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful advice. And I think we can all look back in our careers and either see ourselves in that, or we see others who were really smart. And sometimes they were tactical and strategic, and sometimes they just raised their hand one day. I know I raised my hand and said, how can I help? And I found myself living in Hong Kong and heading up Asia Pacific for 4.5 years. So these things happen in a really wonderful way. So,
and the imposter syndrome kicks in the moment where you're like, why did I do that? But you do it.
I was on the flight to moving to Hong Kong, and the flight attendants asked me if I was going on vacation. I said, no, I'm moving there to work. And they said, wow, that sounds really exciting. Aren't you scared? And I'm like, now that you say it, yep, I really am. I'm not sure why I did this. Like, there was this real moment, right? But it was one of the best decisions. But it is those moments where you just have to go with it and kind of throw yourself forward. So Angie and Heather, thanks so much for sharing a little bit of yourselves and your sort of growth trajectory, and for joining us at Punching Through. And I look forward to people tuning in on our next episode in the coming days.
Thank you so much. Great chatting. Bye, everyone.
Bye.